Okay, so what I'll do is first, because I'm going in that first order, okay? I'm going to sort of combine there and try and be as brief as possible to the questions. I think that what at the moment we sort of existing in a place in which we are holding in our heads several truths that contradict each other. So, for example, when I came to the University of Cape Town, I was astounded by the lack of engagement between lecturers and students. There's a way in, and this is what I try to address in my hierarchy. The idea that students can actually fall through the cracks, that they can end their, be in law school, and at the end of 4 or 5 years in law school, not have one person who can write a letter of reference because there's not that culture. So, that culture of engagement, my experience, is missing. That's outside of the protests, the alienation, all of that. I think that South African universities are now making a very broad statement here, but the students don't matter enough. There's all the incentives go, or most of the incentives go to research. And I think that students are seen as and if you've got a class of 200, you can use technology and a whole range of things to engage. So I think that that's the one thing. On the other hand, we have the situation where students say, I want this and I want that and so on. That's the other truth. But that to me is, in many ways, not. It's not really as significant a problem as the engagement that you have with the student from the beginning. Our job is to, when the students come, when we talk about a pipeline, when a student comes into the academy, to say this is an honourable, engaging, important career. We want you to. We're investing in you. We take responsibility for your learning. You should take responsibility for your learning. This is a partnership. We model good conduct. We model what citizens. That's what I'm talking about. So I think that's all part of it. And I think that culture has to change even before the students protested. The students were right about some alienation, and I'm only at one university, so I can't speak for others. But I think that's an issue. Um, the question about a pipeline, I think, is so important. And I'm actually working on a project with some WITS lecturers as well on this project called Presumed Incompetent. And it's about the experience of black women in the academy, black people who are sort of strangers to this particular world. And this presumption of incompetence kicks in. You raised this question in engineering school and so on. It's not just engineering school, trust me. The social sciences and so on, historically, I think some of the assumptions you had problems with. But I think there's the one solution I think that would be great is the idea that every first year student across the university, Harvard does that, Yale does it, all students, no matter what their discipline, take the same course. And it's a course about that raises all these questions. So I think South African universities would be great if every faculty, all students, had the same course. Then this idea about trust and so on, again, I think that the trust falls through the cracks because sometimes students and lecturers and the administration, we don't engage sufficiently in this conversation about the collective enterprise. I mean, the universities are collective enterprises, and we're too much at war with each other, when in actual fact, much of what the students want, I assume that, the leadership wants, and so on. So yeah, there's got to be a lot of listening. I agree with you, but everybody's got to listen. There's some students who don't listen. So the listening is part. It's the dialogue and the understanding. And I think that we can now. The space is being created to do that. The specialized courts, as you know, the University of Cape Town is going through an institutional and reconciliation process. And now students are asking us to, throw out all the criminal charges, etc., etc. I think, for example, in a situation in which students actually assaulted a security guard, kicked him in the head, and so on. I don't think that's not TRC. Maybe you can go to the TRC, but that's criminal conduct. So a specialized university court, although I think it's a very good idea, as well as the TRC process. Um, I don't know, I feel very uncomfortable. Are universities such places where we really need? We don't even have a traffic court, and people are killing each other on the roads in South Africa. So I hear what you say, it's an interesting idea, but I feel very uncomfortable because it gives the message that universities are places where there's so much violence and so much crime that we actually need specialized courts. Thank you.
So, colleagues, I mean, forgive me. I think we need an honest conversation. Otherwise, what's the point? And frankly, I think we make too many generalizations. The South African universities. The South African universities are fundamentally different things. His forte is different from Wits. Wits is different from UCT. Let's come to terms with this. You can't make generic statements. Partnerships, with due respect. Yes, we need to listen. But 55% or 48% of American students do not qualify. They do not come out of a degree from American colleges. That's how high it is. Now, the point is, in some institutions, there is very strong engagements. There is in some departments rather, there is very collegiate engagements that happen. In other departments, there aren't. The question is, where is it happening? Why is it happening there? And why doesn't it happen? Is it possible to do it in a sociology class of 1500? Now, I think you're right. I think we've used that as an excuse because there are technologies that are possible that could be used far more effectively. But let us say, I'm coming back to that argument. The students, firstly, you said two things. Firstly, the leadership is different from the students. Is that racial? Is that, take Wits. Wits in 1994 had 30% black students, completely black, the overall definition. This last year, it's 82%. Wits's executive is 85% black. 85% black. Its lecturer base is 47% black as of today. The change between the last 5 years is 30% to 47%. Ask yourself, where in the world have you seen an institution change from 30% to 80% in a space of 15 years? Where did you see that? Where have you seen a transformation of an academic cohort to 47% black from less than 5% in the space of 25 years? Now the question is, let's stop making generalizations. The question is there something of value by young people? Yes. But everything young people say is not true and is not accurate. That doesn't mean I uncritically accept everything that a young person says and implement it. You know how many emails I've got in my inbox from young people, black students, who say we feel threatened in this institution. We don't feel threatened by white colleagues. We feel threatened by fellow SRC members. Politically threaten us. I can show you those letters. The question is, the one other thing that has been, correctly, many many middle-aged black people feel that actually we support these students, correctly. Because when I was there, it was an alienating experience. But I can tell you now, Wits in 1994 or Wits in 2005 was very different from Wits in 2017. Don't make the illusion that it's the same Wits. Now, having said that, does that mean Wits has no problems? Obviously not. We got serious problems. I'll tell you what they are. We got some blatant racism. They're exceptional and they're blatant. And every single time that has come in, we fired the person. Fired, no question. Fired. Then there is more subtle forms of racism, which are far more difficult to listen. But you know that statement that you suggested, that if a lecturer at Wits says that a second language English student cannot pass, by saying that you can get fired from Wits. It's illegal. We've passed a resolution that has made it illegal. So let's be honest about what happened in this. Were there legitimate causes for these protests? Yes. Actually, too many students, some 50%, didn't have enough resources and they were struggling to survive. They had a right that the costs of higher education were too high. And they had the demand that we need to bring down the cost of higher education. Absolutely spot on. We need to defend that and give them the right to defend this thing. It was a historic struggle. But it's also true that people burnt down 2 billion rand worth of infrastructure at our universities. You can't say that that didn't happen. You can't justify it and then say, why do we have such a violent society? We have such a violent society because we're so unequal. But we also have such a violent society because there are no consequences when you burn. We have a township that burned 17 schools. It destroyed a generation of students. How many people have been locked up? You destroyed the futures of black students in that township. And nobody says that cannot be allowed to exist. We have to say at some point that there shall be consequences for violence. There shall be consequences if you hurt people. There shall be consequences for rape. Democracy does not mean we let people destroy the very social fabric of our society. And I think we're lying to ourselves if we're saying we're not appeasing violence. Too many political leaders threaten violence and we keep quiet. Too many activists threaten violence and we keep quiet. So should we have protests? Yes. I come from that tradition and I'll defend that right. I'll even walk with them. I spent a night with students in 2015. But I am not apologizing that when somebody tried to burn a building, I brought in police. And frankly, I'll do it again. Because the future of the society, if we're going to deal with the violence, we have to deal with the question of security and we have to deal with the inequality issues that are there. So I think we need to, and I'm sorry to be so strong, because I think if we don't do this, the future of the society is dead. We have no possibility of a university in this country if we don't deal with this issue. We are on the verge. We will destroy our universities in this country if we do not have the courage to demonstrate some leadership here. And that means we must be heard, that when people are violent, we must take action. Having said that, I do think we have to, and you heard me say this, we have to resolve the formal contradictions of our society. We have to resolve that access problem has to be resolved. The fact that middle-class students, lower middle-class students cannot have no scholarship system to allow them to study. Nobody should be bankrupted because they send their kid to university. That is unacceptable. And we have to create the circumstances that enable this. So, one final thing I want to say, and I do want to respond to this because I think it's an important question. Are we beginning to transform the society? Our institutions? Here's the question. I think we are beginning to. There was a study done by the University of Pretoria that as of 2019, a majority of academics in the higher education system will be black. In the system as a whole. So is something happening that is positive? Yes. Are there problems in that transformation? Yes. Because what happens is too many black students are coming in, black staff are coming into the system, but they're stunted. They get big class loads, they do all of the administration, and they never can do the research that give them the kinds of promotions that are required. We've got to deal with that problem. Because what we've created is the top-end professors get very little teaching, and they do all the research, and the guys at the bottom do all of the lecture. That is something we have to deal with, and we have to start creating pathways of progress along these lines. But let me be clear. If you think you're going to run away to Oxford and do this, you're deluded. If you think you're going to run away to the United States and do this, you're deluded. Because if you look at one of the largest complaints in American universities is the junior people who are teaching and the senior professors are doing the research. That's the point. What we have to start saying is this, and I go back to this thing about the importance of differentiation. Our institutions, 26 universities, will do different things. We need some that are focusing on undergraduate teaching. We need some that are focusing on postgraduate teaching. We need some that are doing research. Now, that doesn't mean individual academics don't do research in the HBUs. I'm not suggesting that at all. Everybody does research. But you are looking at some institutions focusing in a big way on producing postgraduates, and you need mobility amongst all of these institutions. So Obama started in Chicago, he ended his legal degree in Harvard. We need somebody being able to start in one place and end somewhere else. That must be allowed through the system. But we have to differentiate and focus. I'll end with this last fact. The US has 5,000 universities. 250 are allowed to do PhDs. 250 are allowed to do PhDs. Yet, we see our universities all as all in one and the same thing. We have to start looking at institutional mandates, focusing our mandates, and focusing our skill sets within those mandates, and judge people within the framework of those things. Sorry, thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, sum it up.
Thank you very much. I do think that perhaps the point that Professor Moja is raising is quite important in a sense of saying the gap between the young and the old might be a polarized one where social distance has been widening. Those with experience who are older often believe that in some form they have the monopoly of wisdom and experience. Those who are young believe that they have monopoly of radicalism and social justice. And once you have those positions, each believing that they have a copyright that can't be disturbed by the other, you're not going to have a meaningful dialogue. When people communicate, they'll communicate not to understand but to respond. Fundamental challenge. The second point, I'm happy that you've raised the issue of lecturers, because most of the interaction is with the lecturers. With the management, it's during the fee increase period, and then you disappear for a while. It's other bursary and so forth, but every day it's with the lecturer. I remember what made me to be fascinated with knowledge production at the University of Transkei. It was an intellectual hub. The likes of Professor Vilakazi, Gerhard Totemeyer, many others, they had such close relationship with students. You knew that when you go to the staff club, it's ideas. They would even in the evening have seminars where we're talking societal issues. So that in itself made me to literally look forward to just being one of these guys and women who were quite knowledgeable in a sense. But what happens now, the massification, email response, email received noted, and so forth. That creates alienation. I think the issue of engineering and the technical subjects and the natural sciences, we need to pay greater attention to that. It occurred to me as we were moving from campus to campus at UNISA, trying to propagate what this new transformation will be. When we got to the Florida campus, when we went into the other ones, which are your accounting, it's sort of, there's this subtle resentment that, oh gosh, these social scientists are coming in. We are just technical people, unaffected by the society. We're dealing with international standards without actually understanding that there is no tension between global competence and local relevance. But because this language of transformation, perhaps we should blame ourselves as social scientists because we started talking about epistemologies, epistemic justice, and we're speaking in tongues that other people are not easily accessing. And now you come in there, they think you have come to hypnotize them with something that will take them away from their profession. So I think something of repurposing and repackaging the message and also inviting those. But also there is some protectiveness to say, this space is ours. I can relate to that very well because in my university at Michigan State, I was always told this university is one of the top 20 in political science. And then someone says, we have never had a student from Africa who is going to get PhD and in this and that, the other one almost and so forth. You just don't want to hear that. Because it's almost like life is going to be made almost impossible for you, the sense of subtle alienation. No one is saying, no, go away, but you almost feel something. But now, I do want to just end by raising yet another thing. The fear factor, it's a reality. We should also factor it in. I dealt with managers in some universities who said, no, I gave so-and-so. One time I was the acting ED, communication and marketing, my institution. Then there's this staff member who was just permanently absent for 3 months. And the manager, why are you not dealing with this? Hey, you know, given the current environment, it's a white manager. It's better if you just deal with, it's more like it's your own affairs situation, you'll deal with that person. So I bring the person and the staff member, what is happening? And the person who was the manager said, after the person had left and I said, this is what is going to happen. Whew, I feel so relieved that you have said that. I could have said it myself, but you know. So that fear factor, to what extent is it big or small, I don't know. And the last point I want to raise here is why in black universities there is not this discourse on decolonization. The irony is that universities such as the Western Cape, UNITRA, Forte were leading in the 80s. They became intellectual homes of the left. They had a more evolved theory of what some of these decolonization and changes were. And the irony is that when they got into this other side of freedom, the struggle became the one of survival. You can't patch an auditorium ceiling. It starts falling on people. And you do not know what to do as a chairperson. You do not know what to say to lecturers whose seminar rooms have just collapsed. So at that time, you start thinking, do I think Gramsci or do I think fundraising? You become a hustler.
Sure.
But the other reason, though, is the migration of skills, where most of the people just could no longer withstand these challenges where every day you were in this conflict or that conflict every day, there was this stigma or that challenge and so forth. But the point that I didn't hear anybody raise here, in one institutional assessment we're doing, we realized the other fault line that was coming. South African students disappearing, they are the majority in the undergrad, come postgrad, they suddenly shrink, and then by the time you get to PhD, they are more like rhinos, endangered species. And I then suggested in this...
Sorry, there's some people catching a plane, so we need to wrap up.
Let me cut my sentence half. So that tension raised a number of things, including the immigrant students versus the locals versus the others, who is the dean from where, and so forth. And you find that these became spaces of mobilization and alienation. But I could elaborate if they were not catching the play.
Then I get. Could you please join me in thanking our big colleagues? And thank you all very, very much for coming.